in mind. And the reason why I think it's most important is because your perception of conflict, even if it's different for different situations, is going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you know it's going to be a struggle, it's going to be a struggle. If you see it as negative and you're guarded and you're not open, that's what's going to play out. So, but if you see it as an opportunity to change a relationship, change the dynamic, to do something different, then that's what's going to happen. And then you're going to get different results. So your perception is the first thing you have to look at, because it's going to affect the next 7 rules. So this one has got to be open, honest, why you want to do it, what's the incentive, what's the goal, and to actually kind of have that in your mind so that as you move forward, it can play out in that particular way. You know, the fact of the matter is, if you have a negative perception of conflict, you're going to be more inclined to avoid it. You're going to be more inclined to mismanage it, to deny it, that it even exists. You're going to be more inclined to just sit on it and not do anything. You're going to be more inclined to resist it or to project it on somebody else so it's their problem, not yours. The worst case scenario, if you have a negative perception, and I think most of us probably do because we've had bad experiences with it. And I would say it's because it wasn't probably done effectively, is that we could start to generalize it toward other things. Anything that looks, smells, or has any similar characteristics, we could automatically have the same reaction before we even get into any kind of dynamic, because past experiences has taught us that. My sister has one of these golden retrievers, you know, one of those dogs that sees no boundaries. And so they figured out they needed to put one of those, what do you call those, shock collars on them. Well, apparently that first experience is fairly traumatic, because after that, he refused to come out of the house. he generalized the outdoors with pain. Truthfully, I don't think we're that much different. I think if we're ever involved in a severe scenario or dynamic, it'd be very easy to start generalizing. And then we become so guarded around open and honest communication that we rarely have it. And you know, the evidence would be your relationships, be it work or personal. And then a pattern develops. And sometimes these patterns are subconscious. We don't even know they're there. We just react to them. And you know, it's very difficult to change a pattern. You want to know how difficult it is? Take your right foot. And I want you to lift it up. I want you to go in a clockwise and make circles with it, clockwise. And I want you to raise your right knee. Keep doing the right foot. And then I want you to draw the number 6. See what happens to the clockwise circle. You know what happens. They start going the other way. Patterns can be so fixed. And it's not just patterns. Sometimes in our own departments, we create a culture that has created a pattern. With the informal ground rules that aren't spoken, they're just acted upon. Those are tough to deal with because you've got to name it to work with it. And a lot of people would rather not name it because that can be painful, because that means then we got to work on it. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist. I can get by 8 to 5. Well, can you really? And is it the best thing for everybody involved? So if you have a positive perspective of conflict, of course, you're more likely to resolve it, to encourage it, to escalate it. Sometimes conflict has to be escalated to get to the table, for people to get that it's really a problem, to move past it, to deal with it, to be open to it, or just let it go. You know, when you see conflict as a positive, you're kind of motivated to resolve it. So you don't want to waste a whole lot of time sitting with it. You just want to address it. Let's just talk about it. I think it comes down to this. If your motivation to resolve a conflict is greater than the conflict itself, you'll be more inclined to address it. If your motivation to resolve is greater than the conflict itself, where it doesn't even feel like there's a thought process, that when that trigger occurs, you immediately react. What's the danger of that? Where it actually does appear to be stimulus response. What's the danger?
You're not in control.
You're not in control. In a sense, you're essentially the victim of the stimulus. And you can't change it. And so the point is to insert the ladder in between the stimulus response. And how do you know? Think about the people or the situations that trigger you, and think about how fast you get triggered. The ones you get automatically triggered that fast, those are the ones you want to work on first. Because those are the ones you want to regain control, so you insert a thought process, even if it's just for a half a second, so that you can actually start going up the ladder and notice you're going up the ladder and stop yourself before you get to taking an action. And then after reviewing, and if you still decide to take the action, you can then accept full consequences. I work with this guy who speaks ladder, because he teaches it too. So he says to me one day, after we're doing a workshop together, he says, "You said something the other day, and I'm finding myself going up the ladder. This is an effective use of that." And he goes, "And I wanted to talk with you about it, to find out what's going on." So what he did was, he was starting to go up the ladder, and he was aware that he was going up the ladder, and before he took an action, he stopped, climbed down a couple rungs, and decided, I need more information, because the way I'm headed is a one-sided ladder. Because you see, when you go up the ladder, you become judge and jury yourself without the other person's input. That's what's so ineffective about it. So what do you think is the best thing you can do if you catch yourself going up the ladder in a relationship that matters to you? Somebody from like the second row wearing green. I don't think that could be you. This would be very easy. You get a book. Yeah, would you? I'm gonna do an Aikido move on her. What's your first name? Yeah. What's your first name? Sure. I picked Sherry because I think it would take her. You know, just in case. Yeah, this would be bad. All right. So I just want to demonstrate. You can't see it right now, but it's those last three words. It's called acknowledge, embrace, and redirect. This is in the martial arts is a direct correlation to conflict resolution. So if you were going to punch me in the stomach, let's say using that, in very slow motion, and so you were going to go like that. So start to do that. Now, if I see out of the corner of my eye this coming, what would be a natural response? Yeah, maybe to block, and then if I knew her and we had a bad history, I might even hit back. Like, what are you doing, right? Which is like yelling at each other. Okay. So in the martial art of Aikido, which is synonymous with these 5 levels of listening, especially levels 4 and 5, the difference is now you would do it again, real slow. And the acknowledge part is to see it coming, which is to be in tune with relationships, to know when there's tension, to know, the sensitive relationships, see it coming. And then in Aikido, instead of blocking, I actually step out of the way, and as this is going forward, I grab, embrace. And what embrace means is embrace the conflict. Get their point of view, hear what they have to say. So she's still doing all the works, and I keep it going in the same direction it was going. So it's coming, I grab it, and I keep her going in the same direction, and then I put in a move, which is called redirect, which I won't do, where it's so awkward that she'll immediately go down, and then I'll look at her and go, "Are we done?" In a matter of seconds. That's what Aikido is to take their energy, go with the energy, and redirect it. And then it's over. Now, thank you for coming home. I'll get you. So what does that mean when we're talking about listening? It's really listening to understand, which is to be open to the conflict. The embrace part is to listen, hear their perspective, ramifications, and the redirect is to focus on solutions instead of who's right or wrong. In other words, I know you're upset. The comment I made yesterday, you feel like it was totally out of line. Help me understand. Here's the redirect. What I could do differently so that you feel better about when I make those kind of comments. Redirect the conversation to solutions instead of staying on the conflict. And that's what Aikido's about, and that's what happens with listening. Is by doing the listening, the hardest part is the embrace, and then redirect the conversation to how do we fix this? What do we need to do differently? Yelled a lot and was very difficult to work with. And this is what he would typically do. He would, when he needed you, he would call you and go, "Yeah, get down here." Almost like a parent-child dynamic. Now, I was manager. This was the third largest nonprofit in the world. So this wasn't like just a company. This was like a big company. And guess what we did? We provided educational materials on leadership. And we had the most dysfunctional leadership. Does that surprise you? And so when I took the job, the guy that I replaced, he told me, he goes, "When Terry calls you down, you just grab a pad of paper and you get your butt to his office." And I remember, I just laughed because I didn't know what they asked, and I was interviewing. I'm like, "Oh, really? Okay." Not knowing that was real. And sure enough, so then as it started playing out, it didn't matter whether I had a client in the office. It didn't matter what I was doing. When he wanted you, you got down to his office. And I struggled with this. So we'd go out on Fridays and sometimes drink a lot of beer with the other managers. A lot of that. And I would ask them, like, do you have the same experience? And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, what do you do?" They go, "Nothing. You just get your butt down here." I'm like, "Seriously?" Like, it just feels rude. It just feels you don't know what he wants. They're like, this is what they said. The last guy that challenged him on that is fired. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, there's no support here. But I couldn't let it go. And so I paced back and forth, and then when I realized, what's the real problem here? Is it that he's rude and just out of line? No, you know what it was? And this is where this model came from. No conflict would occur if there wasn't an unmet need. In other words, somebody's needs not being met, which creates the conflict. Most of us don't look that deep. We just look for the quick fix solution on the surface. The quick fix solution would be to stop doing that. But that doesn't get at the problem. And what I realized is it wasn't the fact that he was rude. It was one of those long hallways when you had to go down, so it's like it just made it worse because you come down this long hallway. And then he had a big desk. He was a little man. He had a big desk and 2 little chairs. So he actually sat there like, this parent-child thing was like, and what I realized is that the need that wasn't being met was I felt incompetent because he never told you what it was. You didn't know if you were going to get yelled at. You went there stark naked, and then you had to kind of dance with whatever he threw at you. And in most cases, it's like, "Let me go get the file, I'll come," and then you go down the long hallway. That whole thing. I needed to feel confident. I didn't feel confident. That was the need that was triggering this for me, why maybe my other colleagues didn't get triggered by it, but I did. So then the question is, if that's the problem, how do I get that need met? I thought, okay, I know. And this is what I did. And this is also managing up. It's the same principle. I go in, and there I am. So we're having our meeting, right? And at the end of the meeting, he goes, "Is there anything else?" And I'm like really nervous too, because nobody else would do this. I'm like, "Well, actually, there is one thing." And he's like, "What?" And I go, "You know what would be great?" He's like, "What?" I go, "When you need me, like immediately, if you could just take a second and tell me what it's regarding, I can get to whatever I need, bring it down so I don't have to keep running back and forth, and I can be ready, and then we can have a more efficient conversation. Is that something you'd be willing to do? And he goes, okay. I'm like, okay? I spent 6 months drinking beer. Worrying about okay? But it was because once you know what the need is that's driving the conflict, then figure out how to ask for it in a win-win way. There's the upward managing, so that they see value in it as well. And I'm not pointing out his deficiencies as much as I would have liked to. Instead, I asked for what I needed, and when he said yes, the deficiencies just melted. They were no longer an issue because I got what I needed. And that's really what it was about all along. So when I mediate conflicts, and they're going back and forth, I'm like, hold on, Paul. If we can manage the how, so that you're comfortable in my presence, we can talk about it. We're comfortable with each other. We can talk about any what that is out there. But if we don't manage the how, then the what is going to be skewed. Because if you're an SOB while you're talking to me, all I'm going to remember is that you were an SOB. And you're a bigger one because that's how you played it out. I don't even know what we were talking about, because that's become secondary to the how. And so the how is really what sets the stage. So I do this leadership retreat in the mountains. The other guy who does it is more of a in-the-moment guy, and I'm more of a planner. But we're co-facilitating. I send him the outline 2 weeks in advance, because, that's me. He can't find it. He didn't even know he got it. So he shows up at the workshop the night before. It's a 3-day workshop. He's like, what outline? You gotta be kidding me. And so I'm frustrated. I'm like, this. And so we start going over, and he's like, that's not a good idea. I don't like that. I'm like, who are you? You lost the outline. You didn't even get a say in this conversation. That's what I was doing. And he's getting more defensive because he's like, that's not going to work. And I knew he was right because he's at his best in the moment. But I wasn't going to let him be right because he lost the outline. So we got to this point. We're the facilitators. We called it truce. Like, all right, let's. And we got pretty good at this over the years, where we could just put that aside, do the workshop, and then go talk about it. Okay, using this model, after the workshop, we go out to breakfast, and we spent the first half hour just shooting the crap about life and wives, kids, whatever, how you doing, blah, blah, blah. But what we're really doing is we're connecting. We're managing the how. So now it's time to put the sensitive issue on the table, but we're already connected. We already like each other. We already know we're comfortable. And the question was, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? Even the question was phrased in a how. And we're like, all right, how about this? We just meet a week before. Okay, done. That conflict was resolved in 30 seconds. And the reason it was resolved is because we managed the how, so we're comfortable, we talk about anything. But if the how's not there, the what is going to be skewed. Extremely skewed because you're going to be protected. But you knew that, right? All right, and then last, this is in the book. It's also, I have an article a free article on my website that has all this. These are the steps, like if you had to have it out with a coworker about the steps to take to create a safe how, so you can do the what. So thank you, and stay afterwards if you have questions.